Hi everyone and welcome back to a new video review by Mio Lessons. Today I'm going to talk about the new Olympus OM-D E-M1 II that I had the chance to test in Spain just recently. It was a press event organized by Olympus Europe and I was able to test the continuous autofocus, continuous shooting speed, 4K video and many other features of the camera. Before beginning, I just want to make it clear that this is not a final review, it's not a complete review. I used the camera for one day, which is definitely not enough to check all the settings and come to a final conclusion. That said, I did manage to take a lot of images with the camera and I got a pretty good idea how it performs. So let's get started. Let me get the single autofocus performance out of the way first. It's really fast and only slows down a little in low light situation when there isn't a lot of contrast. I never really got a lock failure and I never felt the need to switch over to manual focus. It's fast and reliable at all times. Continuous autofocus is one of the improvements we're most looking forward to. Since Fujifilm and Sony made relevant improvements with their flagship APC cameras lately, it was natural to expect the same kind of improvement with the new OM-D camera as well. I can safely say that what I saw during this first real-world test left me with a very positive impression. However, the results I got are not perfect, and I need more in-depth tests to really see the full potential. Let me do a brief recap of the autofocus specifications. The camera has 121 cross-type phase detection points, and you can choose between 4 AF area modes: all target, none areas target, 5 areas target, single target. I didn't notice a relevant difference in speed or accuracy between the different target modes. Olympus often advised us to use the 5 areas mode, but for some situations like a bird in flight, you really have to make sure to keep the AF point on the subject. I also wish that the camera could have more options like a 5x5 or a 7x7 grid, similar to Fujifilm's Zone AF. You move the autofocus point with the arrow pad, which is comfortable, but I wish Olympus had implemented a dedicated autofocus joystick. That way you could use the arrow pad for other settings. Now let's see some examples in continuous autofocus. First, there is this funny little dog called Kiwi. As you can see, when the dog is far off in the distance at the beginning, the camera gets the focus too short for many frames, resulting in the subject being slightly out of focus. I only got one autofocus shot in the middle of the sequence, and when the dog gets closer, the performance is almost perfect. In this second example, I didn't get any autofocus shots, but there are several shots that are slightly off. It looks like the camera was hesitating between the horse and the horseman, but focus is a bit too short once again. The third example confirms the same findings. The camera hesitates more when the subject is far away, then once one of the balls becomes the clear subject in the frame, the results are nearly perfect. At the end of the day, we had the chance to see some birds in flight. It was the time of the day where we encountered the heaviest rain, so they didn't fly for too long, but I did manage to get interesting shots. Here as well I got some slightly soft images as well as some autofocus shots. However, I was once again surprised by the camera's ability to track the subject when it got really close, even when my tracking movement wasn't really precise. Another nice improvement is that the camera locks very quickly onto the subject. For example, this was the first frame of an 18 frame per second sequence. The bird is low on the ground, its colors can be easily confused with the environment, but still, the camera had no problem locking onto it right away. The AF also reacts quickly when it has to correct focus in the middle of the sequence. Here the first shot is out of focus because of me. I didn't manage to keep my subject at the center. However, as soon as I started to recompose just enough for the camera to recuperate, 2 frames after the birdie is in focus again. In this latest example, the original EM1 would have had more trouble. The EM1 II has some serious continuous shooting speeds capabilities. With the focus lock on the first frame, you get 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter and an impressive 60 frames per second with the electronic shutter, and those speeds are valid for RAW and JPEG. 60 frames per second becomes very interesting with a new feature called Pro Capture. When you half press the shutter release button, the camera starts to load the frames in the buffer memory. so when you fully press the shutter release button and start to take picture, you already have 14 frames saved. We saw a demonstration of this with an archer hitting water balloons. Thanks to the high speed, you can capture the precise moment when the arrow hits the balloon or when the 4 balloons explode at the same time. I also tried to take a picture of the archer to see the arrow leaving the bow, and it worked. The buffer capabilities of this camera are really impressive. Of course, if you shoot RAW, it won't last for too long, but it lasts enough to capture a scene like this at 60 frames per second. At 18 frames per second, I was able to shoot for 4 or 5 seconds even with RAW files. Even more interesting is the continuous shooting speed with eye tracking. With a mechanical shutter, you have a maximum speed of 10 frames per second, which is very good for sports photography. You have live view with short blackouts in the EVF, which helps track the subject more accurately. With the electronic shutter, you can go as fast as 18 frames per second. And to follow a subject at 18 frames per second with the EVF without any blackouts make things surprisingly smooth and easy to do. Here I was curious to see if there would be any distortion when panning quickly with the electronic shutter. I did a quick test, and as you can see, rolling shutter is there, but it isn't as noticeable as I would have expected. With the birds in flight sequence, I took 2 thirds at 18 frames per second with the electronic shutter, and I didn't notice any particular distortion of the bird or the background. What would be interesting to discover is when and how much rolling shutter can affect your image, and in which situation you don't have to worry about it. So far, it looks like you can use it for wildlife photography. Another pleasant surprise for me was the 4K video footage. I only shot in Cinema 4K, which is the best quality you can get, with a maximum bitrate of 237 megabits per second. The images are sharp, the movements are smooth, and I didn't notice any artifacts. I kept the picture mode on in the video menu, which is a picture profile designed specifically for video, and it gives better dynamic range. It actually works well, and I was positively impressed by the amount of detail I could keep in the shadows without blowing the highlights too much. Low light performance is good up to 1600 ISO. At 3200 I still find the footage acceptable, but noise starts to become more visible. At 6400 ISO, which is the maximum available for video, the noise is clearly there. Cinema 4K gives you a more widescreen aspect ratio in comparison to Full HD or regular 4K. Note that there is no sensor crop in either of the 4K modes. 5-axis stabilization works really well alone or when combined with optical stabilization. In this shot I was inside a car driving on a bumpy dirt road, and I was following the horse at almost 100mm. When walking or doing complex movements with the camera, I noticed less distortion or jello effect in comparison to the previous models, but in some shots it is still visible, especially in the corners. Another positive aspect for filmmakers is the presence of a microphone input, a headphone output, and a HDMI output. The only area where the camera doesn't perform as well as I would hope is with continuous autofocus. It is not as fast as, let's say, a Fujifilm X-T2 or a Sony 6300. In some shots I got a decent result like this one, while in these other examples the AF was just stuck on the background. One trick I noticed is to keep the shutter release button half pressed to motivate the camera to change focus quickly, but that can also create some back and forth movements when the camera tries to adjust the focus distance. For video you can only choose between 2 AF target modes, all target and single target. Single is the one that gave me the most precise results. Finally, rolling shutter is well contained for video even when panning fast. We saw how good stabilization is for video, but for stills it gets even better. I got crazy results when using the new 12-100mm Pro lens at 12mm with Sync IS, which means that both the sensor and optical stabilization are working together. The last image is not a joke. It was shot at 20 seconds. It's true that I was leaning against a wall with my backpack, I was keeping the camera in front of my stomach with the strap stretched to help me stabilize the image as much as possible, but still, we're talking about a 20-second exposure. Of course, this is an extreme example, and in a real-world situation there are a lot of things that can influence your result. How stable you are, how cold you are, how tired you are, how much coffee you've been drinking, etc, etc. But it's interesting to see how far this technology has come. When the original EM5 was released, you were lucky to get near 1 second of exposure. Today, the EM1 Mark II can manage 20 times slower than that. But the improvement is not just about stabilization. Olympus uses the sensor shift technology also for the high-res shot, where it takes 8 pictures and moves the sensor by half a pixel in between shots to create a 50 megapixel JPEG or an 80 megapixel RAW image. The new processor is capable of correcting imperfection with small elements that are moving, like leaves blowing in the wind or moving water. I tried this briefly with leaves blowing in the wind, but as you can see, the results are not perfect. You don't get the grid artifacts that we see on the EM5 Mark II or Pen F, but you get ghost images instead. That being said, these leaves were quite close to the foreground, so it might work better for smaller elements in the background. Then I tried to do something that is technically not possible yet, a high-res shot handheld. After 14 attempts, this is the best result I got. It's not perfect, and you can notice that the details are slightly soft if you enlarge the image. Again, this is an extreme test, but it's interesting to note how this technology is evolving. I have a feeling that Olympus might really be able to give us this mode handheld in the future. Now let's talk about image quality. The EM1 Mark II has a new 20 megapixel sensor and a new TruePic 8 processor. The sensor is a newly developed version in comparison to the one found on the Pen F, and this is certainly related to the phase detection points. Olympus claims more dynamic range in comparison to the original EM1, but I have yet to compare them side by side. From the images I gathered at the event, I am not seeing anything new in comparison to the latest Micro Four Thirds camera, to be honest. The out-of-camera JPEGs are excellent at low ISO. They are crisp with lots of detail. If you raise the sensitivity, you can get mushy details if noise reduction is set to standard or high. It's better to keep it too low or off, but there's no doubt that best results come from the RAW files. One thing that has been fixed in comparison to the original EM1 is noise that appears during long exposures and when noise reduction is set to off. The camera feels solid and is weather sealed. I used it in heavy rain with the Pro lenses and never had any issues with it. I like the grip, which is larger and more comfortable to use with bigger lenses like the 300mm Pro. I never felt the need for a battery grip. The camera is comfortable to use as it is. Most of the buttons and dials are the same as those on the original EM1, so the camera provides lots of function buttons and is easy to use. The electronic viewfinder is excellent with great clarity and great brightness, while the 120 frames per second refresh rate helps a lot when shooting in low light or with fast-moving subjects. The rear monitor is a multi-angle type. The touchscreen capabilities allow you to take a shot, change the focus point, or use it as a virtual AF pad while composing with the EVF. However, I ended up disabling this feature because my nose was always touching the monitor and changing the focus point as a result. You can also use touch sensitivity to highlight a setting in the Super Control panel or double-click to enter the sub-menu. However, you can't use it to navigate the main menu unless there is a setting that I missed. I don't really like the new menu system. Olympus got rid of the various colors that were helpful to identify which category you were in. Now it's all monochrome and I find it less intuitive. I started to take pictures with the camera around 2 p.m. and after more than 1000 shots, many burst sequences taken at 60, 18 or 10 frames per second, continuous autofocus almost always on, and more than 30 clips recorded in 4K, there was still 38% of battery life left. For normal shooting, I am sure that one battery can last an entire day, and you might have some juice left. Recording 4K or using the Pro Capture mode is what drains the battery faster. It definitely seems like a good step forward in comparison to the battery life of other Olympus cameras and I would say to other mirrorless cameras as well. So that's it for my hands-on video about the E-M1 Mark II. Everything else will come with my full review, and I'm really going to take the time to test the camera as in depth as possible. To end off, I wanted to share some thoughts about the price. I know that many of you are disappointed, and I admit I was surprised as well when the price was officially announced. $2,000 or €2,000 is a lot, and I'm sure that many of you are asking the following question: is the camera worth that price? I cannot give you a definitive answer because once again, one day with the camera is not enough, but what I can say is this. From a strictly technological point of view, I can't think of many cameras that come close to the E-M1 Mark II, and I'm not just talking about the Micro Four Thirds system. I could easily expand this conversation to other mirrorless and DSLR systems. What you can do today with the stabilization is impressive. What you might be able to do tomorrow with the high-res shot could be even more impressive. And let's not forget all the relevant improvements made to the continuous shooting speed, autofocus performance, rolling shutter, 4K video, amongst other things. However, most of these improvements are aimed at sports or wildlife photographers or filmmakers. So if you're shooting street or doing some simple travel photography, you may not take advantage of all these features. The new sensor doesn't seem to be a relevant step forward, though I need more tests to confirm this. My hope is that Olympus will copy and paste some of these new features onto a future EM5 Mark III. It would be nice to have more than one OM-D camera with face detection autofocus and 4K video so that customers can have more choice. I know that some of you consider the camera too expensive given the smaller size of the sensor. Now my 2 cents on this is the following: you shouldn't buy this camera only for the sensor. The 20 megapixel sensor is a very good sensor, but the strengths of this camera lie elsewhere. It's all about the specification I mentioned earlier in this video. It's also about the lenses and the fact that you can get a system that is smaller and more portable. So, thank you for watching, and as usual, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment. You know that I always do my best to answer all of you. See you soon, bye bye!